Hello everyone, welcome back to Silla's Podcats, or welcome to Silla's Podcats, and welcome to yet another video filmed while I was away and not at home. And today we will be talking about another book review, or well, we will not be talking about a book review, we will be talking about a book, but I will be reviewing it, and the book that we're going to be talking about is The Water Outlaws by S.L. Huang. First and foremost, 10 out of 10. I loved everything about this book, so I am potentially a tiny bit biased going into it. This is partially because the cover is amazing. I love it. So, this is a historical fantasy-esque. The author herself has put this into a wuxia setting, which is entirely appropriate for everything the book is doing. It is also a gender-bent adaptation slash rework, if you'd like to call it, of the Water Margin. I cannot talk anymore. The Water Margin, or The Outlaws in the Marsh, which is a Chinese text from, if I remember correctly, somewhere around the end of the Yuan dynasty. That has been a while, let's just say that. I haven't read the original text yet, but I really want to because I want to see how S.L. Huang actually worked with the text. What's really nice is in the acknowledgements the author does talk about the specific editions that she used, so I'm gonna use those translations because unfortunately my Chinese is definitely not good enough to be reading it in the original, but I'm very excited to check it out. Now, The Water Outlaws follows a group of women, almost entirely women to be precise, who call themselves the Liangshan Bandits because they are in the Liangshan mountain range, which is adjacent to a swamp, which is why the original piece is called The Outlaws in the Marsh. Makes sense, right? The entirety of the book focuses on two characters who are very neatly juxtaposed, so you can essentially see their different outcomes and their different ideologies mirrored in each other's attention. On one side you have Lin Zhang, who is a martial arts instructor, works for the Empire, gets accused of something that she didn't do in terms of a crime that she never committed, forced to be put into a labor camp, and almost assassinated on the way there, which is then also why she joins the Liangshan Bandits in the first place. She starts out as a person who is very much unwilling to criticize anything about the Empire, even though when we get her inner thought process we do see that she's not exactly happy with the position that she's in and how much she as a woman has to force herself to adhere to very strict social standards in order to advance anywhere in her position. And she morphs into this person with a deeper understanding of what it might mean to rebel for what you actually want in life. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in just a second, which might go a little bit into spoiler territory, so I'm going to try and put a warning there before I do that, so people who don't want to know anything else about this book before going into it can just click off there. But that is essentially the character journey that Lin Chong goes through. Now on the other side we have Lu Junyi, who is a socialite, a woman of greater renown than Lin Chong is at the beginning, because Lin Chong comes from a very humble background and then later evolves into a martial artist who gets to train a lot of people. So her master status is entirely dependent upon the capabilities that she has, let's just say it like that. Lu Junyi is a socialite. She is not exactly a seditionist, but she is on the cusp of becoming one, at least at the beginning. She is much more outspoken about things that she doesn't like about the Empire. She's much more outspoken about things that she doesn't like about the system that all of them are subjected to, and she uses a lot of her money and influence to bail friends and family out of jail whenever they get arrested for doing something that is not in the spirit of the Empire, the system, the corrupt system of magistrates that keep putting people in jail for things that they might or might not have committed, while completely ignoring that people of higher standings are doing the exact same thing, if not worse, and get away scot-free. Throughout the happenstance of the book, Lu Junyi has to work with Cai Jing, who is one of the highest ranking members of the imperial system, and because of that, and because of the stress and absolute fear that he puts onto her, she devolves into a woman trying very hard to keep herself alive while also knowing that what she's helping him with is probably not exactly a good thing. She has a very inverse arc as opposed to Lin Chong, which makes for a fantastic comparison between these two characters specifically, and in my opinion this is exactly what S.L. Huang was going for, to show that a system, if it is as corrupt as people claim, can be incredibly oppressive to the people who were part of the system, to the point where they warp themselves and their initial desires in order to stay alive, which is exactly what Lu Junyi is doing. She's a very tragic character for me personally, and I'm gonna say this right now, some of the scenes between Lu Junyi and Cai Jing are so terrifyingly well written that I think if I'm ever going to be as good as describing a character's absolute fear in the face of potential death and or torture, I'm gonna be so happy with myself, because those scenes were impeccably well made. In general, S.L. Huang is fantastic at making sure that the characters' feelings and emotions carry over, especially if those feelings and emotions directly influence the actions that they take. Lin Chong is often seen debating whether or not she wants to be part of the Liangshan Bandits because they are, to her estimates, not exactly good people. Some of the Liangshan Bandits got there in a similar fashion that Lin Chong did, which is they got accused of doing things that they were never doing, or their punishment was much more severe than it should have been for whatever it was they were doing. But some of the Liangshan Bandits are people who are there for very understandable reasons, such as murderous. One person is directly said to have owned a black tavern, which are taverns that sell human flesh to other customers. Fun. So the Liangshan Bandits are not necessarily a group of entirely good people who've been harmed by a system that is entirely corrupt. They are also made up of people who have genuinely committed crimes, and yet still fell through the cracks of an entire empire that did not care about them whatsoever. And Lin Chong struggles with that because she is what she herself considers to be a good person. And the book spends a lot of time on deconstructing that vision, that idea, and I was very intrigued by this because I think that the author did a fantastic job portraying that a system is not necessarily less corrupt just because it also happened to punish people who did crimes that you could not possibly imagine doing yourself. Like, for instance, I could not imagine selling human meat to other people. However, the book also makes clear that a lot of these horrific choices have been taken because these people had nothing else to do. There is a short story at the end of this book called The River Judge, there we go, The River Judge. It's an exclusive short story for the paperback edition, but I do think that it was also published in another version or something. And in this we follow the story of Lily, who we meet as a young girl, I think like around 7, 8, 9 years old or something. We follow it all the way to her becoming a grown adult, and she is in a similar situation where she's in a small village that gets visited by magistrates every now and then, and those magistrates get killed, mostly by her father, and at some point she starts cooking them up for her guests because she doesn't know how else to get rid of the bodies. Now, of course, this is not a good thing. I would not say that Lily is supposed to be a good person, but I would say that what this short story, as well as the entire rest of the book, very aptly demonstrates is that she didn't have a lot of other choices. If she hadn't done that, she would have been killed for something her father did, which is not on her. It only is on her because he is her family, and the entire inn that her father owns and operates from is in jeopardy because of that. And I personally think that that is a fantastic way of looking specifically at like bandit figures, because I feel like a lot of the time we, specifically as modern readers, tend to look at banditry and like rebel fighters against an entire empire to be like the unequivocal good guys TM. Especially, this is very funny, especially when we are looking at figures from very dubious constellations, I would say. Like, for example, a lot of people love to talk only good about piratery, which is very interesting considering that pirates also did in fact kill a lot of people. It's just that a lot of their crimes seem justified in the face of an incredibly unjust system that forced a lot of people into piracy because it was the only way that they could have any control over their actions whatsoever, which is exactly what is happening with the water outlaws. The thing that people then seem to miss, though, is that bandits are not supposed to be good people. This is something that I find very, very important when reading books, and very important to look at when reading books. It is okay to read The Water Outlaws and be disgusted by something that some of these women do. I fully understand that, because I personally think that you're not supposed to always fully agree with all of the actions that they take. However, as I said, they are bandits. They have directly gone against a moral system. We don't fully agree with the moral system either, because the moral system always relies upon the political and, in general, the generational system that is at play here, which does mean that some things are deemed less moral than others that we also would not agree with in that regard. However, bandits, in this case specifically, uproot the moral system. That does also include morals that we right now would think are good to keep, like not killing people, or not eating people, or not stealing in general. And it is very important to remember that just because people are not necessarily good people doesn't mean that the system that they rebel against is now inherently better, because it punishes, or it happened to punish, the right people. I think this is a very good lesson to walk away with when you read The Water Outlaws. It has incredibly complex characters, most of which are female, which I also think contributes to some people not wanting to understand the full scope of the complexity that we're seeing. I'm not saying that this is entirely just because of misogyny, but we've seen it time and time again that female characters are held to a much higher standard than male characters, which is honestly very disappointing. So if you are looking for incredibly complex female characters, some scenes that might definitely turn your stomach, but otherwise a incredibly complex morality play between a corrupt system, a person who was trying to worship that system as best as she could, who was then plucked out of the system and put with a bunch of rebel bandits, to be precise, who have been abandoned by the system in one way or another and who keep rebelling against it, versus a person who has been rebelling against the system from the inside out, but now cannot fathom to do this anymore because it would put her in direct mortal danger. Then The Water Outlaws is going to be perfect for you. The fight scenes are fantastically choreographed, which I think is partially because Esa Huang is a stunt woman, which is so cool to me. I love that. And overall, the writing style itself is also fantastic and meant to draw you in so perfectly. There's also an aspect about the magic system, which is not so much a system as that there's magic happening, and it is very reminiscent of older wuxia tales and just other wuxia books that I've read as well, where the magical aspect of it seems a bit more like martial arts training, but on like magical steroids. It's fantastic. But basically what we have in here is another very great juxtaposition of nature versus construction, I would say. Because on one hand we have the god's teeth, which, if I understand it correctly, are some kind of stone or mineral that people can tap into to experience great surges of strength. And on the other side we have God's fangs, which are supposed to be created by human hand by combining scholar stone and God's teeth. This obviously goes horrifically wrong, and it is there's a lot of people dying just for that research, and I think it's another very great point that S.L. Huang makes in this book, which is the juxtaposition, once again, of something created by man versus something already existing. And there is, in my opinion, also a very great point to be had about how far science sometimes goes in a direction that we cannot abide by because it allows for people to have very amoral weapons to essentially annihilate an entire plateau of armies. Like, armies plural, okay, this is very important. I loved that about the book as well. I think the book made so many incredibly good points, but on the plus side of that, it was also just entertaining. The characters are very well thought out. They have a fantastic chemistry with each other, especially the Liangshan bandits are fantastic in the background. Lin Chong is having such a great character metamorphosis, and the relationship that she has specifically with the Liangshan bandits definitely, you know, makes her into the incredibly complex character that she is. Lu Junyi is very isolated in her worries, even with the people that she grows somewhat close with, which is another fantastic way of showing just how isolating it can be when you are completely cut off from any kind of community in a system that does not care about you. However, and this is where potential bigger spoilers are coming in, something that I've noticed with people criticizing this book is that one thing that a lot of people seemed bothered by, apart from the fact that they didn't like the fact that some of the bandits were genuinely not good people, but something that people seem to be bothered by is that the bandits themselves, especially the ones in command of everything that's going on in Liangshan, are very averse to saying that they are rebelling against the emperor, or for directly stating that they are rebelling against the empire. A lot of these people will keep saying things like, we are the empire, because the empire is made up of every single person living within it. So obviously what we're doing is we're not rebelling against the empire, we are improving the empire because we are improving ourselves and we are improving the systems in place, specifically the corrupt magistrate systems with all of the with how they control every single piece of the land. And they are even doubly so careful in saying something against the emperor. And people have been very upset about this because they say things like, you should know that the entire system is corrupt, so obviously the emperor is also corrupt. And I think the problem here is that we don't allow a book's morality to maybe disagree with our own. And I think that's a shame. Because I fully understand, in this case particularly, I understand where people are coming from. I understand that what we want from books often, especially when it comes to books with like rebel figures in them, is to rebel against the entire system. We have so many books that start with like a rebel group or something, they're just scattered all over the land, but they start disagreeing with everything that's going on in politics and whatnot, and we often have them rebelling against a very specific figure, usually a king, an emperor, something along those lines. And at the end of the book, or the series, however long it is, we see a toppling motion at the very top of the hierarchy. And after that, if there is an after that, because a lot of books kind of stop there because they just don't have a lot more time to deal with the aftermath of everything they've created, but at the end of that we have like a striving towards egalitarianism and democracy. More often than not, it's not true egalitarianism, and it's also not true democracy, but again, usually books don't have a lot of time to discuss these topics anymore at the end of them because they've spent all that time building up the rebel movement. And while I think those stories are important to tell, especially because they do more often than not incite rebellious thoughts against a corrupt system, specifically against the leaders of the corrupt system, I think that sometimes people think that this is the one-size-fit-all when it comes to rebellious movements. And that is not what the Water Outlaws is doing whatsoever. What is important to remember about the Water Outlaws is that while it does have fantastical elements, it is genuinely inspired by historical events, and a historical text also dealing with historical events, and more precisely, a historical imperial system. Now, I'm not the person to always say that history excuses everything we see in books, especially not when it comes to more fantastical books. Fantasy books are not history. It's very important. They're also not historical fiction. However, the Water Outlaws, at least to a certain degree, is. And what is very important here, apart from the fact that, you know, characters can also lie to themselves, I feel like we also keep forgetting about that, but what is very important to remember is that in a imperial system, you do not find fault with the emperor. Because the emperor is the son of heaven, and the son of heaven is not to be criticized. It was very important for a lot of people back then, in whichever country you look at, by the way. Like, if we look at England, for example, there was this whole thing about the worldly hierarchy directly corresponding to the godly hierarchy, with king and god at the tops respectively. If you spoke ill against the king, you spoke ill against your god to a certain extent. There was a lot of nuance there as well that we don't really have time to get into right now, but that was the essential system, right? And in China, the emperor was supposed to be the son of heaven, which obviously meant that you were also not supposed to speak ill of the son of heaven ever. We also see this in the fact that Cai Jing is very big about plotting and getting his way, but once confronted directly with the emperor, he refuses to say any of that, because he's scared of what this will mean for himself as a person, because he thinks he's gonna die. And it's very important to remember that the bandits are part of the people who kept living in an empire that was ruled by the emperor himself. They are used to that system. They don't want the imperial system to change. They want the injustices that they face to change. This is what they fight for. They fight for being part of the imperial system, not to dismantle the imperial system. And while I understand that this might bother some people, I do invite you to try and figure out why exactly it bothers you. And then I try to invite you to figure out how this book might change your mind, and how you might read a book that encourages different ideas from what you yourself are used to. Because I think this is what reading is all about. To broaden your horizon and to figure things out for yourself, and to figure out how things might fit into the canon of a book, even while still disagreeing with them. That's a very important point. You don't have to agree with everything this book does. I do just encourage you to figure out why the book is doing them, and how that influences the characters and vice versa. So, with all that being said, if any of what I said sounded interesting to you, please check out The Water Outlaws. It is a fantastic book. There's so many kick-ass women in it, and the incredibly complex moralities of the characters was captivating to me from the start, and it just kept getting better. So, honest to God, I highly recommend this book. It is, as far as I know, a standalone. The only thing that is added to it is the exclusive short story, which you don't have to read in order to understand the book or anything that happens within it. So it's just about 500 pages of absolute goodness. I loved this book. I highly recommend it. And again, if any of what I said sounded interesting to you, do yourself the favor and check out The Water Outlaws by S.L. Huang. As always, I hope that you have a nice reading experience yourself, and that you keep having a nice reading experience, and I will see you soon.